Hi everyone, this is Firuze Gökçe. I am a startup advisor. I help startups to shape up their marketing and SEO strategies. This is the first episode of the SEO experts interviews, and today I have the honor to have Tyson Stockton. Tyson is a global client strategy consultant in search metrics. He led Fortune 500 companies in utilizing search data to drive SEO and content strategies. As VP of Client Services and Account Management, Tyson leads the US's client success, SEO, content consulting, account management, and data services teams. Now, Tyson is serving as global client strategy consultant to bring more strategic aspects for the global clients of search metrics. First of all, Tyson, welcome and congrats for the new position. That must be so exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be here with you.
Thank you. So I have quite a lot of questions, but when I just put them into structure, maybe we can start with how did you end up in SEO? What happened? Just please, can you share your personal story with us?
Yeah, that's a great kind of place to start. And I think like most people in SEO, like we all kind of fell into this world in like one way or another. So for myself, I was going to grad school and I actually got my master's in sustainable tourism development and planning. And so I was kind of going down that path, but at the same time, I was working for Inline and Ice Warehouse, which is a ice hockey e-commerce company that's part of Sports Warehouse. And I was working with them as I was going through grad school, just kind of, paying my way through. And one thing led to another. I did my undergrad in marketing. So then I started taking over more and more responsibility for like the marketing side of that business. And no one was really focusing on search, and both in the sense of SCM and SEO. I first got into SEM and started learning AdWords and learning how that works. And I was kind of intrigued by one, the aspect of this, like, how do you find information? And so the notion of, we kind of like, we all go to Google and search various things and you kind of like feel like you're in control of it, but like understanding like how some information, that like information retrieval became more and more of an interest. So I just kind of just started learning as much as I could by reading blogs, listening to webinars, whatever it was, like any source of information I was absorbing. And I'd say like the first bit, I definitely was more heavily focused within the SEM kind of like paid search side.
Yes.
And then eventually Sports Warehouse, the parent company of Inline and Ice Warehouse, they created a position for SEO and SCM analyst. And so I ended up taking on that position, started working with their 14 different domains, and I was working with the individual companies on their like AdWords and kind of paid search efforts.
Yes.
And then also started working with kind of the product and engineering team on SEO for like the companies at large. I then took a role as the marketing manager in Europe. So I moved over to Germany for about a year and a half and was leading their marketing team. So it was marketing coordinators for each kind of primary market within Europe, as well as the team sales division, as well as like the translation team.
Yes.
And so I spent some time there. So it was a little more broad kind of marketing focus, and then came back and was doing more in like the SEO, SEM, and a bit of like strategy for the companies at large. And then from there, I moved over to search metrics and just fully dived into like the SEO world. I mean, I had experience. It was always a little bit more interesting for me than like the paid side, just because of kind of given the nature and more complexities.
Yeah.
And I really was drawn to how fast the industry evolves and changes, and then also that continuous learning aspect was something that always kind of like attracted me to it. And so the combination of like how it was different from traditional marketing of like you're not creating demand for something, the demand exists, you're just, you know, showing up where someone wants to be. Like that aspect was really, you know, something that drew me. And so part of taking on the role at Search Metrics, and at the time it was SEO consultant or kind of professional services manager, is just felt like an opportunity, one, to just fully jump into the deep end within the SEO world. And so I made the move over there, moved from San Luis Obispo up to San Francisco, and which I'm from Santa Rosa, so it's like kind of coming home, so to speak, in that regard. And for a while, I was managing kind of like my own portfolio of clients. Worked with a few of, you know, the larger kind of global clients of the company early on, and then one thing just led to another, and you know, I moved on to enterprise, like leading kind of like the enterprise segment within the business, and then services as a whole, and then took on the VP of, you know, services as well as account management.
Yeah.
And so it was really like owning that entire experience of like the client facing team. It was really great experience, like being able to work with so many different like variety of websites. And I feel like it really sped up my own just learning and progress within the industry, being exposed to so many different brands and strategies and things like that. And then most recently, I decided to make a kind of career change and move out of the operational role. The next step for me was going to be more, you know, I was kind of going down more of that generalist path, or kind of like GM path within the organization. I decided that I wasn't as drawn to the kind of general management or leadership track, and I was a little more drawn to kind of the tactical strategy and those elements. So then I decided to take on the role of global client strategy consultant, where I can give input into like the needs of the SEO industry, the needs of the clients, how the company is supporting and kind of giving guidance to those type of
Actually,
businesses.
they make sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because you have such a large accumulation of all the information around you, and then you kind of make an analysis and synthesis to bring them all together, and then try to express what they really mean for the client or for the companies that you work with. Because this kind of general understanding, the structure, is very important. When you just delve into too much detail, you miss the big picture. When you try to go with the big picture, if you don't know what's going on underneath, then you fail. But your approach is just being in different parts of SEO and understanding them. And right now you're in a position to just give it away, to make it meaningful for your clients. So I really like the trajectory of your career. And, you know, I wish everybody could have this type of iteration and development into their careers. But I see that this is very, you determined to do that because you have some picture in your mind. And without that determination, it's not possible, because SEO is such a large area. There are lots of moving parts, and the big moving part is Google. Every day it is surprising us. So to, you know, get ready to those surprises and just evaluate them and how to express it for or explain it to your clients, that's very important. And I see that it's the right time, the right moment for you. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that aspect of keeping up with how Google is evolving and how the landscape keeps shifting and changing, like that's part of the fun where you always have more to learn. You always have to kind of like challenge or adapt new strategies within search. So it's like I think that ongoing just like evolution is one of the
Yes.
parts within SEO that really like drew me to it. And I think that's also why I have, kind of a draw and an interest also kind of within the SEO education space as well. And, doing that support and that work with search metrics, but then also kind of exploring like other ways and getting involved more within kind of like the education side of the
Yeah.
industry, which I think is super interesting, just because again, like we all kind of just fell into it. You just kind of learn by doing it yourself. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity within kind of like education and like other ways of helping kind of facilitate, whether it's getting into the industry, or if it's even, hey, now you're responsible for managing like an SEO team, like how do you evangelize within an organization? And that type of strategy I think is really fascinating, because you can have like some of the brightest SEOs in the world that know everything that needs to be done, but then that's only one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is like, okay, how do you actually make it happen? How do you get people on board? How do you actually get initiatives to take place? How do you get the cross-functional alignment? And it's like there's a whole nother side,
Yeah.
I think, within just strategy of SEO that is both tactical from how are you competing, what is the body of work you're doing, but also in the sense of like, how do you get your organization on board and how do you actually execute on the work?
Yeah.
And that sometimes I think can be just as challenging as understanding like, what do you need to do? And
Yeah.
a lot of people seem, it's like you can find a lot more information out there on like how to determine what needs to be done,
Yeah.
but that like how do you get people on board to then actually execute, to me seems to be like more of the forgotten side of it, and
Yeah.
like actually having
I
success in SEO.
I believe so, because we like it or not, but it's for sure that SEO is touching every part of the organization, including sales, software development, web design, branding, audience management, whatever you call it, other than it's whole like a business concept. It's not a marketing concept anymore, because SEO needs to play nicely with every part of the organization and to be digested and internalized every team member, so that you can really create a solution for your customers or clients uh, by being at the same page as an organization, align with every part of the organization. So you are then becoming more valid, more inclusive, and more understanding what's going on, and capable of delivering a real solution. But as you say, this part is really hard to understand, because people get to know SEOs, technical SEO, on-page SEO, off-page SEO.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, those parts are really important and all just interlinked to each other. But we really need to talk about and include all parts of organization, and create a kind of a policy, not a policy, but a strategy, which involves every part of the organization and everyone in any team member. And
Yeah. And I think that's like a key aspect to achieving success in SEO, is not just understanding like what needs to be done, but how do you get the editorial and content team on board? How do you get product and engineering on board? How do you manage the stakeholders and like the executives on like expectations, forecasting, all those other elements. And I think that's part of the interesting side of SEO is it's not one facet. It's not like a super linear like
Yeah.
problem to solve. Is like you have so many components, whether it's the evolving landscape or just this like internal kind of like politician game
Yeah.
almost within the organization. And the bigger the organization, the bigger the stakes are, the more people you have to get on board.
Oh,
And with that comes, those different challenges that, just makes it interesting, really.
yeah, yeah. It's a life learning process, and that's very exciting because every day you get excited or sometimes angry, excited, angry.
Yeah.
Sometimes, sometimes too much excitement, but that's a great thing because that keeps your mind always working and trying to create solutions. And that's what I like about, I think, SEO is just it's open to everybody. And if you want to learn it, you can really learn it because there are all those resources out there. Many, many years ago, it wasn't like that. It was like really minimum resources. And then you just try to understand Google, what it is doing, and then try to create your own solution, and then trial and error. But those who consistent in still being in SEO are the most respected experts like you in SEO right now. So that's very important. And for a newbie, if they want to not try, but if they want to dive deep into SEO, they have to, I think that as a learning process, and it really needs time. It's not something that you can get it overnight, because it's also, other than trial and error, it's all about experience. What did you get from, what kind of lesson you get from each of your experience, and even just writing them down and just keeping up to date, and also checking out what happened before and compare it in today's conditions. I just want to ask you, because I'm an advisor for startups, and with the startups, the most difficult thing is just start with SEO, because it seems like a big concept, and so many of them, they always say that, oh, we don't have enough time for it in order to grow or scale. We just go for the AdWords. And yes, AdWords is a big push for getting quick results, but at the same time, it is like opioid. It's like when you start it, you can't stop it. And
Yeah.
then you never take care of your SEO, and then one day you find out that, oh, I need really take care of my SEO, but it's in a way too late. There are other competitors in the market, and so on and so forth. So what do you think about SEO for startups?
It's an interesting space, and I'd say like it's not one that have as much experience in. Like I've spent more time within kind of like the enterprise space, but it's been something I've been playing around a little bit more with. And I think the most interesting aspect for like startups is setting the expectation of SEO being like a long-term strategy game. And then it's almost like in those early phases, it's more preventative versus like immediate impact. Where
Yeah,
it's like any website that just launches or only has like a handful of pages, the search performance is only going to be so much.
yeah,
But depending on like the framework of how the website's being built, what potential issues, like is the website being built in the way that has like, some crazy indexation issue where it's creating infinite URLs and like things like that. So I think like the most important phase for the startup is more of like setting the foundation for SEO growth and knowing like, hey, this isn't going to be an immediate, yeah, we might need to lean into like paid search and those other elements like immediately, but we know longer term that's not going to be as sustainable of like a practice or like a channel. So it's like, especially for like the early stage startups, I think the most important element is having that kind of solid foundation that the website can then grow upon. And then I would really lean into more of the content strategy side. And how are you identifying relevant content? How are you satisfying that user experience? How do you plan on scaling out and growing the website as a whole? And like those aspects seem, at least from my perspective, like the most important for those early stage startups, where if you're dealing with a enterprise business that has, you know, 1 billion pages, well, sometimes you're looking into like, okay, where are we over index? How do we reduce? How do we do more with less? How do we, you know, it's like it's a different style of SEO. And I think within startups, it's so much more of like preventative of like avoiding those pitfalls that a lot of websites will fall into and then have to clean up after the fact. So having like a clean foundation that then the website can grow upon, and then having that really solid content strategy of this is how we're going to grow the website, because no startup's going to have immediate impact from like just 10 pages or whatever it is that they launch at, but kind of avoiding that cleanup work that oftentimes comes later once a business is more established can save so much time for growing SEO as like an effective channel. And so I think like the most important piece is just making sure you have that clean, like stable foundation to build a site upon.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The preventative term is the best one, because when I have a startup and they already got, let's say, hundreds of pages because they were creating blogs, but there's no structure, there's no, directory structure, and then you really need to work on all those pages and 301s, redirection. But this all creates another layer. So sometimes you just can't deal with all the layers at the same time. So it's very important just to start, have a solid structure, and also have a website which is, even you are using a WordPress theme, doesn't really matter, but you really need to make sure that the page speed is okay. Because if you use themes which has too many images or not enough speed, enough for for Google, then it creates lots of problems. So thank you for really putting it in a great structure. Even your answer is awesome. May I ask you, what is your expectations for 2022 in terms of search engine optimization or Google's moves?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the continuation of what, like the direction has been for a while. And I expect that to continue with the upcoming year. I think you're going to see some key development areas, but I think like the safe bets is this focus of like understanding query intent and relevant content to it.
Oh, I see.
And that has been a core focus of like a lot of the algorithm updates. It's been a clear kind of like message from Google for a long time. And so I think that understanding of content, understanding of intent, and like satisfying user experience is going to be like still your kind of like baseline core direction and initiative that we're going to be like operating within.
I see.
I do think as more and more websites get up to speed on like core web vitals, like those type of page experience elements are going to be significant as well. And I didn't really have the expectation that that was going to be this huge splash in 2021, but it's going to be this kind of like gradual ramp up as more and more websites embrace it and have that. And as Google has more options of like what URLs to serve for different queries,
Oh,
that's going to be like a constant piece. But I think a lot of that is the continuation of the norm.
yeah.
And that's nothing that's like groundbreaking from like what we saw this year. Is just more of the expectation of like, yeah, doubling down, that's going to be a core area of focus. Where I think SEO is going, and maybe it's 2022, maybe it's further on, is you're going to have this further kind of extrapolation of like the actual like search experience.
Uh-huh.
So what modules are Google surfacing to people as they're able to understand intent more and more? They're going to understand like the user kind of search funnel. Well,
Hmm.
someone searched for best running shoes, then they search for Nike running shoes, then they search for, Nike Pegasus, whatever like model. And so I think Google's showcased this in the Google Search On like event that they had earlier in the year, where they talked about like introducing more of like not just like related searches, but like refinements of search. And so this like search funnel that most people, when they're looking for something, they'll start with one query and then they search another and then they go to another, and you kind of go on this whole like journey.
Oh, I see.
As Google's able to understand that journey more and more, they're going to kind of start funneling that user through that.
Yeah.
And so I think looking at how they're serving the SERP, how they're kind of like funneling user,
Mhm.
then making sure that you have that presence kind of throughout each stage is going to become more and more significant.
Wow.
And then the other area that I think will still take some more time, but I think has a lot of potential,
Mhm.
is I think you're going to see more and more variety in like the types of search, where it's like we've pretty much been operating within text search. We know it's been talked about a fair amount like voice search, but I think image search is the other one that's kind of this like kind of forgotten component. But if you look at what Google's been broadcasting, what they've been talking about, what they're really focusing on, like, okay, image search is already there. It's very like anecdotal, kind of like what time is it in Berlin, or like what channel is the whatever sports game on. And I think image search is going to become more and more interesting, and what they're able to do from like searching an image and then adding text to it. And that area, I think it's super, super interesting.
Yeah.
Like the example that they gave during like that event was basically, and I forget who was presenting, but they took a picture of a bike derailleur.
Uh-huh.
And so it was like, hey, I don't know what this is, but it's broken. So they took a picture of it and then added the text, how to fix. And so what it was doing was it was taking the image, identifying, hey, this is a derailleur to a bicycle, then how to fix, and then the search results that it showed for it were all these different articles or videos or whatever else on how to fix a broken derailleur. And
Wow.
so that combination of ability to just use your phone and take a picture of, hey, I need to fix this or whatever it is, like that type of evolution in like types of searches, I think are going to become more and more common.
So
So I
do you,
think like the two big bets I would say is that Google owns the experience once you make a search, and then how
uh,
they feed you into other searches. And then also that like expansion into like a variety of like types of way of acquiring information, whether it's through image, voice, text, doesn't matter.
yeah, that was my question actually. How about voice search? I mean, it's been a hype for a while, but then with the voice search, really what you get is quite limited. And it doesn't sound like voice search has any importance or that much importance yet. What do you think about that?
I think depending on the vertical and the space, like it'll be more interesting or less interesting depending on it. I think oftentimes when people are looking for a voice search, it's more kind of like anecdotal. And so I think like the same type of information that gets answered on the search, whether it's like no click activity or whatnot, is what time is it? What is this? And
Yeah.
it's like very like question answer driven versus like, where do I go to purchase this, pair of running shoes or
Yeah,
whatever
it's
else it is.
impossible, right?
And yeah, so it's like I think like voice search isn't going away. And like depending on like your line of business, like it could very much be like a pillar of your strategy.
Yeah.
But I think for most, like whether it's e-commerce or even just like thinking about it, is it's like the image I think has more potential for marketers in the sense of like if someone's doing a voice search, they're deliberately not wanting to be at their phone or the computer.
Yeah.
And so the chance of them going through all the stages to actually have a conversion for your site, whatever it is, to me is a little bit less likely than someone that's doing like an actual search or taking an image, because then you know that they're already engaged in whatever device that they're
Yeah.
on. And so I think those type of like that type of evolution of search is, it's still early stage, but that's going to become more and more significant, where voice search will remain and it will continue to grow, but it's going to be a little more like anecdotal and
Yes.
just like, hey, yeah, I would have done the same search and just taken the answer from the actual search results page versus driving traffic to any given domain.
Yeah. I have one more question, and that is about the matching different types of search intent and funneling them. But at the same time, you create kind of, there's this canonical issue. Because anyway, and even though you match different search intent, but the content, the essence is the same. So you create kind of similar pages for different purposes. How do you get rid of this problem?
That's a great question. I think like the first one, and this is something my buddy Sebastian is Square, and I worked for quite some time with. He's brought it up, and like we've talked about a fair amount. Is like there is this like hybrid area of like search queries that have mixed intent, where you could have one part informational, one part transactional.
Yeah.
Well, if you create two different pages with a clearly different intent, and even if it's on the same domain, you can have those stacked rankings. And so I think rather than having that like duplication issue, if you really dial into like, hey, some people that are searching for best running shoes, it's more informational. They want to read an editorial article. Some want to see an actual category page that has all the running shoes with the highest reviews. And so like, especially on those broad kind of head terms, that's where you have these blended search results of having mixed intent, because Google's not sure,
Yeah.
especially if it's on a broad search, like, or even something like, let's be more broad, like running shoes. Okay, do they want a category page? Do they want a list of like the top running shoes for 2021, whatever it is? And so you see those best of lists, those like aggregated editorial pages ranking in side by side with your standard kind of like e-commerce category pages. And so I think the higher up on the funnel, the more opportunity you're going to have maybe like stacked rankings of two different intents. The more and more granular the query, or the more specific the question is, the more likelihood that Google is going to know like the intent of it, in which case you need to have just one experience that's going to satisfy that intent. So in summary, I'd say head terms, totally possible to have it as a strategy to have like kind of dual intent or multiple intent pages that are unique enough to also survive in search.
I see.
The more granular, the more long tail the query and the page type, the more likelihood that you need to be just dialed into one intent that Google's trying to surface.
I see. I see. Well, thank you very much, Tyson. It's just such a great question and answer session, and I really appreciate that you are here today with us. Do you have how our audience can reach out to you if they want to follow you or connect with you?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, just Tyson Stockton, there on Twitter, Tyson_Stockton. And then also, feel free to check out the website, TysonStockton.com. So yeah, open, any of those platforms or anything like that. And then, yeah, I'm around, whether it's with search metrics or other stuff in the industry.
Oh, thank you so much. We'll talk to you later again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thanks.